Singing goblins, beautiful artistry, and men in monkey masks. The weird animated world of Tolkien. During this time of year, there are traditions a lot of us return to. Drinking way too much nog is a big one. Spending time with family, of course, if you're predisposed to such things. And if you're watching this video, there's a very good chance you mainline all 3 extended editions of the Lord of the Rings films in one day and fall into a Hobbit-fueled fugue state. You know the feeling. You're watching Saruman get stabbed by Wormtongue and suddenly it's somehow 3 in the morning. And just in time for the long winter nights, a new Lord of the Rings film is on the horizon. Lord of the Rings, The War of the Rohirrim hits theaters this weekend from producer Peter Jackson and director Kenji Kamiyama, the director behind shows like Ghost in the Shell Standalone Complex, Blade Runner Black Lotus, and DuckTales. He did backgrounds on DuckTales. The animated feature tells the story of Helm Hammerhand, the 9th King of Rohan, and his daughter Hera as they defend their people and homeland against the violent forces of the Wild Men of Dunland. They're those big beardy guys Saruman recruits. We're not going to do a whole lore explainer on the Dunlendings and Hornburg and all of that because it would spoil the movie. However, if you do want that, leave a comment down below and Matt Caron will get on it when he's not reading Dune.
Oh, who, me? I'm always reading Dune.
But the excitement of a new Lord of the Rings film has made us want to look backwards to the animated movies that came before. Yes, before the now immortal live-action Middle-earth movies and the on-television television series, we had some very charming and very weird animated films. I'm also going to toss up the most tepid of spoiler warnings since these movies have all been available to watch for at least 20 years, but, you know, people are weird. If you want to remain completely in the dark, now's your chance to go.
Blind fools!
We're going to begin, like all good stories, at the beginning with the 1977 animated adaptation of The Hobbit. Produced for NBC, the 78-minute film was directed by Arthur Rankin Jr. and Jules Bass, who are the studio that made all those Christmas specials. You know, your Rudolphs, your Frosties, your Nestor the Long-Eared Christmas Donkeys, and a movie about a guy who was the bassist for The Last Samurai. As far as adaptations go, this one is actually pretty by the book, pun obviously intended. We meet Bilbo as he's about to smoke out of his steampunk bong when suddenly Gandalf shows up faster than the Flash to join the smoke session. He goes about his standard introduction shtick.
I am Gandalf, and Gandalf means me.
And before Bilbo knows it, he's been recruited as burglar #1 and strikes out with the dwarves, who all got a big glow up in the Jackson films. Oh, and did I mention the singing?
Far o'er the misty mountains cold.
It's a Rankin and Bass film, after all. It's got to have music. The soundtrack contains 10 songs written by Tolkien himself, and several of them performed by Thurl Ravenscroft, who despite his name isn't a warlock, but he was the original voice of Tony the Tiger. Even if you're not a musical fan, Down Down to Goblin Town is a fucking jam. The whole film has such a fantastic aesthetic and design that it feels like watching storybook pages in motion, partially helped by the influence of English illustrator Arthur Rackham, according to Arthur Rankin. Let's talk about the crazy good voice cast too. It's a who's who of 70s people. Orson Bean, who you may remember from Being John Malkovich, plays Bilbo. Hans Conried, who'd previously voiced Captain Hook in Disney's Peter Pan, voices Thorin Oakenshield. Acclaimed director Otto Preminger, most famous to me for playing the second Mr. Freeze.
Wild.
Plays the Elven King. Late Night with David Letterman regular and co-star of The Burbs, Brother Theodore, a very weird little German performer known for stand-up tragedies, played the most terrifying Gollum in the whole wide world. And Gandalf was another acclaimed film director, John Huston. He never played a Batman villain, but he did star in the greatest weird Italian movie of all time. Another big factor is the actual animation was done by the Japanese studio Topcraft, who would later morph into Studio Ghibli under Hayao Miyazaki. It's just so much fun. The creature designs are all great. The goblins, the spiders, the trolls, Smaug, the wood elves look like creepy little ghouls. Fantastic stuff all around. The 5 armies do their whole thing, and we say goodbye to the king under the mountain before Bilbo returns to the Shire and waits for Gandalf to come visit for his birthday. Where the Rankin Bass Hobbit feels like a warm cup of tea, the next film is more like a warm cup of tea with low-grade LSD in it. The The 1978 animated film The Lord of the Rings by Ralph Bakshi is what we like to call a beautiful mess. There's a lot of gorgeous animation and painting and illustration throughout the film, but the film's biggest flaw might be that it's too faithful an adaptation to the source material. There's a lot of running in the Lord of the Rings book, and they really stick to that in the film. Originally, the script for a Lord of the Rings film was commissioned in 1969 by United Artists, who hired John Boorman to write a draft. A year later, Boorman's script was deemed too expensive. If you know John Boorman's work, you can imagine what he'd do with Lord of the Rings.
The gun is good. The gun is good. The penis is evil.
Bakshi learned that Boorman's script was abandoned by the studio, most likely scrapped because Boorman wanted to produce all 3 stories into a single film, a plan that Bakshi called madness. In 1975, Bakshi convinced United Artists to produce The Lord of the Rings as 2 or 3 animated films. They also accepted Bakshi's pitch to, quote, do the books as close as we can, using Tolkien's exact dialogue and scenes. To better understand the 1978 film and its animation style, we need to talk about Ralph Bakshi. Ralph Bakshi is a Palestinian-American animator and director who got his start directing short cartoons like James Hound, Deputy Dog, and Rocket Robin Hood. But Bakshi is more commonly known as a vanguard of adult animation, with his films like Fritz the Cat, Cool World, Heavy Traffic, Coonskin, Fire and Ice, Wizards, and American Pop. We're not going to dive too deep into Bakshi's filmography, but if you want to learn more about his films, their history, and more behind the scenes on Bakshi's Lord of the Rings movie, Folding Ideas has an incredibly well done and in-depth video over on his channel that I highly recommend. He also wears a cool hat in it. A lot of Bakshi's films, Lord of the Rings included, used a style of animation called rotoscoping. Animated films have used actors as reference for years. There's vaults worth of Disney footage of people acting out scenes for Snow White or Alice in Wonderland. Not to simplify the art form too much, because it is very complicated, rotoscoping takes said reference footage and animates on top of it. Even if you didn't know what it was called, you've definitely seen it before. Old He-Man cartoons, A Scanner Darkly, Heavy Metal, Waltz with Bashir. Disney even rotoscoped their own films sometimes. The film has all the trademark scenes you'd expect in a Lord of the Rings adaptation, probably because a lot of the scenes from Peter Jackson's Fellowship of the Ring are directly influenced by Bakshi's film. The scene of the Nazgul hunting Frodo, Sam, Merry, and Pippin as they leave the Shire looks eerily similar in Bakshi's film to the way it looks in Jackson's. And all of your favorite Fellowship characters are here. Legolas, Gimli, Merry, Pippin, Frodo, Elrond, Theoden, Boromir with a fun Viking look happening for some reason. And of course there's Aragorn, sporting some high-cut... is that a skirt? Tiny shorts? Not the worst of the character designs, though. Gollum looks like Batboy, and Sam is done real dirty in this. He looks like a World War II propaganda cartoon against chimney sweeps. It's real Durag.
Oh my! Oh, hooray!
Rude Gandalfs aside, the one thing we can say is that Bakshi's Lord of the Rings is ambitious. But with a budget of only $4 million, there's only so much ambition can do. While a lot of the rotoscoping of the orcs looks cool and creepy, towards the end the seams start to show. Just so many chimp masks on guys in a field on horseback. And let's spend a few minutes looking at how Bakshi did the Balrog. It's literally just the Detroit Lions mascot wearing giant butterfly wings. Children's theater doesn't look this goofy. The cast of Bakshi's film also doesn't quite have the same name recognition as the earlier Hobbit film. However, we do get a pre-alien John Hurt as Aragorn and a barely just after Star Wars Anthony Daniels as Legolas. One of the movie's biggest problems is that the ring never gets destroyed. Due to time constraints and a lengthy post-production, the film had to be cut short, ending abruptly after the riders of Rohan and Gandalf show up to save Helm's Deep.
As their gallant battle ended, so too ends the first great tale of The Lord of the Rings.
Originally, the film was planned to be distributed as The Lord of the Rings Part 1 by United Artists, with a trilogy in the works. But that got changed into only 2 films because, again, $4 million budgets. According to Bakshi, when he finally finished the movie, the executives told him they were planning to release the film without directly saying that there'd be a sequel. The executives did this because they felt like audiences wouldn't pay to see half a film. Unrelated, how much money has Wicked Part 1 made? The film did pretty well, raking in just under $33 million, which was enough to warrant a part 2, but after scathing audience reactions, rough critic reviews, and a falling out with producers, Bakshi walked away from directing a sequel. But don't fret, all of you people not at all fretting. We did get an ending to the trilogy just 2 years later, technically speaking. The Rankin-Bass-produced Hobbit won a Peabody, and while it received good to tepid response, a sequel was already in discussion before Bakshi's Lord of the Rings even premiered. And the most logical sequel to a Hobbit film is, of course, the third act of Return of the King. The 1980 animated film titled Return of the King is basically just a long music video. The film picks up after Sam and Frodo have already returned home to the Shire and are celebrating Bilbo's 129th birthday. Bilbo learns that his precious ring has gone missing along with Frodo's finger, and Sam and Frodo retell their experience of tossing the ring into Mount Doom, mostly from Sam's perspective, who is voiced by Roddy McDowall. That's a good get. And when there's no exposition being dumped through internal monologue, the minstrel of Gondor fills the silence with music. A lot of music. When I say it's a long music video, it's because the majority of the film's information is relayed through voiceover over the animation on screen, which feels like a way to cut production costs.
My imagination's running away with me.
In addition to McDowall, the film does have a continuity with the previous Hobbit movie, with Houston back as Gandalf, Brother Theodore back as Gollum, and Orson Beanbag Chair this time voicing both Bilbo and Frodo. Casey Kasem, Shaggy himself and purveyor of goddamn dog dedications, voices Merry, which is just kind of weird.
Will he never cut the cake?
Basically, it's what if Return of the King were just one big final battle? I guess the Jackson one is too, but with way less singing and 100% more Legolas and Gimli. The best friends are totally absent from this movie, but there's a tomato-less Denethor, and we get to see the mouth of Sauron, as well as a deviously jolly version of the Witch King. Compared to its 1977 predecessor, which got flack for adapting Tolkien into a kid's cartoon, the 1980 Return of the King does let some violence slip through. Gollum's lava death, Frodo getting his finger chomped, Eowyn killing the Witch King. A way different vibe from The Hobbit. It of course ends with Frodo, Gandalf, Elrond, and Bilbo sailing away to the Grey Havens on a bros-only cruise, while Sam, Merry, and Pippin watch from the shore. And yes, music plays over this whole thing too.
You won't have to say goodbye.
The Return of the King got overall lukewarm reactions. One of the biggest complaints is that it tried too hard to be both a children's animated film and properly tell the story of the third book of the trilogy, despite not making the first two. Oh, and the music. Nobody likes the music. In an interview in 2003, director Arthur Rankin said that trying to do Return of the King was harder than expected. Quote, "In The Return of the King, we had to summarize what had happened before and then put it all together in 2 hours. It's not a very good film." End quote. And when asked why he chose to adapt Return of the King instead of Lord of the Rings, Rankin put it simply,
"I didn't know the audience would sit still for it. I was wrong."
At the end of the day, even with all their faults, the animated features of the Lord of the Ring universe are important and endearing pieces of art. Are some of them overly long and poorly made in some parts? Sure! But how many movies do you know with a song as good as Goblin Town? But tell us, what do you think? Which of these 3 adaptations of Tolkien's work is your favorite? What's a strange animated film that you think more people should see? And are you excited for War of the Rohirrim? Looks pretty good. Let us know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and for all the latest Shire news, keep it glued to Nerdist.com.